Joining me now is the man you just saw, Jim Chalmers, the Shadow Treasurer. Thanks for your time.
G'day, Tom.
You didn't sound all that positive before. I don't know if you've reflected since. On the cusp of back in the black. Any credit there for the government?
Well, unfortunately, the numbers haven't improved in the last couple of hours, Tom. So the mid-year update is still defined really by a whole series of downgrades to growth, to wages. Unemployment is higher. Business investment is much lower. So all of the things that we've been warning about for some time now, including on this program, have unfortunately come to fruition. And what we're seeing is a fair bit of economic weakness right across the board.
But we're at this period finally after, 10, 11 years where you're going to begin to pay down the debt. Again, any credit for that?
Look, there's a whole range of factors which are supporting the budget. The iron ore price is higher than it was forecast to be, which is helping. Unfortunately, the government's leaving Australians with a disability in the lurch via the NDIS. There's robo-debt collecting hundreds of millions of dollars illegally. There's cuts to aged care. There's a whole range of factors which are propping up that surplus. Obviously, we would prefer the budget to be in surplus, and it's a good thing in the abstract. But I don't think the government deserves a big pat on the back for it.
Iron ore price. The government has taken a conservative approach with the price of that. Now, that wasn't the case under Wayne Swan. I know the government likes linking you back there. Would Labor continue this practice, though, of a conservative price so that it doesn't disappoint, we don't end up with a hole in the budget?
Oh, well, obviously you have to do your best to get an accurate read of things like commodity prices, but not just that, right across the budget. And I think it's self-evident. It's just a fact that over the last couple of years, higher iron ore prices than expected because of some problems in mines in Brazil and all the rest of it. They've been higher than forecast, and that's been propping up the budget. The job for the Treasury and for the government of the day is to get it as right as they can. The government's not got it right in the last couple of years, and that's been to their advantage when it comes to the surplus.
Some of the other forecasts, I mean, this is the government, but it's also Treasury. And when you talk about the forecasts at sort of 2 and 3 years, the established practice is they go back to trend. That's just what happens. Is that still best fit?
Oh, look, you have to do the best you can. And that's the system that the Treasury is keen on. And
what do you think?
Well, in the absence of a better way of doing it, I don't have a proposal to change that, for example.
You don't think they're continually rosy? We need to go, maybe there's a new norm around growth in particular. You look at global growth, it is sluggish, that we need to look at things such as that and inflation and go, well, are there new targets needed?
Well, a range of things about that. I mean, unfortunately, low wages growth has become the new normal, and that's a point that the Reserve Bank has made. Our issue with the forecast is in the nearer term. What you're talking about those assumptions is generally in the 3rd and 4th year. What we're talking about is things like wages and growth. They got those things horribly wrong. They've actually got the wages forecast wrong 33 times in just over 6 years. The difference between what they said people would be earning and what they're actually earning is, for a full-time average worker, is $2,200. So that's not about Treasury assumptions down the track. That's in the here and now. They've got it horribly wrong. And what they've had to do today is eat a whole bunch of humble pie and say, yes, the economy is much weaker than we said it would be. Unemployment is higher. Wages growth is weaker and business investment is worse. And I think that's why they finished the year with a big F for fail on the economy, because they went to the election saying that they'd make the economy much stronger and instead they made it much weaker.
So on wages, what would Labor have done differently from the time of the election, for example? We know there was a policy on penalty rates. Is there anything else that would have moved the needle?
Well, penalty rates are very important. Taking away people's pay for working on weekends is part of the problem. Obviously, there's issues around labour hire. There are issues around the use of visas to undercut wages and conditions. There's a whole suite of things that we're proposing which would help to shift the needle. But overall, the main problem is that growth is now slower than it was at the election. It's slower than what it was when Frydenberg and Morrison took over. It's slower what it was when 2013 when government changed hands. And because growth is so slow, unemployment is higher than it needs to be and wages growth is lower than it needs to be. All of these problems are related.
Isn't the biggest thing, though, if you're talking about wages, businesses? Do we need to aim things at businesses? Because we've just had the tax cuts aimed at individuals. They're not spending the money. So Labor can talk about bringing forward other tax cuts. Well, people are pocketing that money. Isn't the other obvious thing to aim it at business?
Yeah, and clearly we support and have supported for some time now a tax break for businesses who invest onshore. We think that will be a real spur for investment. Business investment is the weakest it's been since the early 90s recession, and there's an enormous downgrade in today's mid-year budget update. So that's a big problem that does need to be addressed. We've been calling on the government to bring in a tax break for investment for some time. We took a policy to the election. We think the government's heading down that path. They should have already moved in that direction.
What about just a straight company tax cut? Because we're very high by international standards.
Well, I don't accept that, but the problem with the tax cut that the government had last term was that such a big proportion of it we wouldn't get bang for buck for, because it would spray around overseas, it would find its way into executive bonuses and share buybacks and dividends and all of those sorts of things,
big business
which is a point that the Treasurer has now made himself about company tax cuts. And what we think is you can get more bang for buck if you incentivise businesses to invest, and that will have a positive impact.
When you say not high, I mean the OECD average is 23.69. We're at 30.
There's a whole range of different state and federal taxes in some of those countries that we're compared with. I don't accept that the tax burden on companies is unnecessarily high in terms of the headline rate, but I do think there's room to move when it comes to an investment.
Okay, even factoring those other countries though, could you point to similar countries to Australia with higher company tax rates?
Well, the Americans have higher company tax rates, and that's supposed to be the home of, the home of capitalism.
What's but that factoring in states? Because
that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. And I mean, let's not get hung up on that. We are not the highest taxing company tax regime in the world.
We're high.
There are countries we compare ourselves which have higher company taxes. And the point I'm making, which is to agree with you, is that there is capacity for us to do more in the business tax system. The best way to do that is to incentivise business investment. The government will do that after spending some time saying that our idea was the wrong idea. They'll adopt a version of it in the May budget.
The government has again pointed to its cap, speed limit, it calls it, of 23.9% tax to GDP ratio. Would Labor stick to that same limit?
Well, our tax policy will be developed over the next 2 years. We're still at least 2 years from the next election. We did put an assumed cap on tax at the last election, but that's the last election. And we'll do the right thing at the coming election. But we had a plan to repair the budget in a fair way. It's not,
But if circumstances, because there's a lot of talk since that lost election. I understand that you haven't put every policy in place. But
we're only 7 months from the election, Tom. I don't think anyone will expect
and I'm not saying you should have, but this was the big lesson, apparently. Don't be just tax and spend. Wouldn't that point to looking at your tax to GDP? Isn't that crucial to not being exactly that?
Look, we'll have a responsible set of tax policies. I'm not going to commit to a tax cap right now, but I will make this point. The two highest taxing governments in the history of Australia are both Liberals, the Howard government and the Morrison government.
But the Shorten government would have knocked them off.
But the Shorten opposition didn't become a government, right? And so let's not let them off the hook here. They like to pretend that they're a low taxing regime. Morrison is the second highest taxing Prime Minister in the history of this country. And so all of this rubbish about how they're a low taxing government, they're the second highest behind Howard, also a Liberal government. We'll do the right and responsible thing. We'll take our time to get our tax policy.
You'll set some sort of speed limit for yourselves, whatever that is going to be?
Well, when we make that decision,
you've got a big say in this, though.
Yeah, and we'll take our time to work through it. And what we'll do is we'll carefully calibrate our tax policies, our spending policies, our investments. We'll do all of that in a way that gives Australia the best chance of growing the economy.
All right.
And growth's been floundering.
And just finally on debt. So Labor says, well, hang on, double the debt under your watch. What evidence do we have that the debt wouldn't be even bigger under Labor?
Well, it's a hypothetical 7 years on, isn't it? And one of the things that really I think people are getting sick of is the government's in its 7th year and its 3rd term, and they want to pretend that everything is Labor's fault. Most of the debt in the system is Liberal debt. Most of the debt in the budget released today is Liberal debt. They've been accumulating it faster than Labor did, and yet they still want to pretend that it's Labor's debt. And I think people are sick of this finger pointing.
But if you look at a couple of aspects, I mean, just take 2016, for example. Your alternative plan over that period of government, 2016 to 2019, was for higher debt.
That was 2 elections ago, and our policy at the last election in 2019, which you conveniently skipped over, would have meant less debt.
Yeah, we've only had a few months of that, which is why I figure a full term is better to compare against the 7 months.
No, but you're talking about policies taken to an election. And the point that I'm making is that these guys want to pretend it's all Labor debt. It's mostly Liberal debt. And I think that's something that they should take responsibility for and be held accountable for.
If you take 2013, I mean, there's so much talk about the 2014 budget. and there were all these measures that Labor opposed, which were either raising money or cutting. So again, that just points to we would have been in more debt under Labor.
A big chunk of those were abandoned after the 2016 election, so that analysis doesn't hold either. But
not all of them. Some of the banked money happened on health and education, for example.
Some of the changes we supported, some of them we opposed, some of them the government abandoned. That's all a matter of history now. What's important now, this government doesn't have a plan to boost the economy. We've seen the cost of that ordinary Australians are paying in today's budget numbers. My job is to get the policy right going forward, and I intend to do that.
Well, we appreciate your time as we very much near the political end. I'm sure you won't be too devastated about that. Enjoy the break. Talk next year.
Merry Christmas, mate.
Jim Chalmers, thank you.